When I meet with clients who are looking to build apps, one of the main things that comes up in conversation is the difference between a native mobile app and a web app. And today, we're going to find out what the difference really is. While there are distinctions between native apps and web apps, the truth is that a lot of companies out there are currently using both of them very successfully and very similarly. So if we take YouTube as an example, if you go to YouTube's app on your smartphone right now, go to the trending page and take a look at what you see there, and then go to their mobile website, you'll find that what you're seeing there is almost completely identical. Now, YouTube, of course, has done this because they have figured out the best way to display their information to their customers, and they're able to accomplish that on both a native app, so that's an app that you download from an app store, and a web app, which is basically just a mobile version of their website. YouTube is an awesome example because they are also an app that needs to be used on desktop because you do go to their website on your desktop computer to watch videos. So in order to have that, it just makes sense for them to also be able to use that in mobile the same way you would use their native app. So when discussing the actual differences between these two types of apps, there's tons of great resources and websites already that tell you the specifics, and if you're a developer, those specifics are great. But if you are more like me and you kind of learn better by example, then watching this is going to be great for you because that is how my brain works. So the first example that I want to give you is a classical example of a simple native app that wouldn't work as a web app. So if you remember back when you first got your smartphone, one of the apps that you may have downloaded, I know I definitely did, was the flashlight app. So you download an app. What this app was able to do was tap into your phone's the flash that was going to be used for your camera's flash and turn it on to work as a flashlight. Nowadays, every smartphone that I know of comes with this automatically in the background, but what you will find is that because it's able to access your camera's light in that way, a web app won't work because web apps often don't have access to your hardware the same way. So with the blog that I've written to go along with this video, you will find the example I've posted where I've gone into Google and searched for a flashlight web app, and there's a lot of them that turn your desktop or your phone's screen brightness up to as bright as they go, maybe just a white screen, and those, well, they definitely will produce some light. They aren't producing light the same way that a native app can by tapping into your camera. The disclaimer I will give, of course, with this, web apps are slowly getting better at using hardware, so by the time you watch this video, it's very possible that there are web apps that can do this. The second example I'll give you is one that you will see over and over again when you read that people are comparing these two types of apps. If you look at mobile gaming, and let's take one of the biggest examples, which is Minecraft. Their game on mobile as a native app works really well. It functions almost exactly like it does on a desktop computer because it has to have a lot of files installed on your phone in order to function properly. If you go to their mobile website, where if they had a web app, you would expect to find it, what you instead find is a sales page. And the reason for this, of course, is just because the native app is too involved to work as a web app. There's not enough technology involved at this time for them to be able to host all of the files they need on the website in order to make it work the same way on your phone as the app itself would. So if you are developing a really complex game, then native app is the way to go. If you aren't developing a super complex game, then you still do have both options at this point. I have come across only one app game that I found as a web app instead of a native app, and that is one, it was developed in Japan. It's called Grand Blue Fantasy. This is a very popular game over in Japan. I actually tried playing it for a little while. You'd have to go to their mobile website, select that you want to view the game in English because by default, of course, it is Japanese. And then from there, you can play the game. Now, it functions almost exactly like most other mobile games that I've played as native apps, but because it is browser-based, I found it was a little more difficult and annoying for me to get to it instead of just clicking the app and it opening and I can access it right there. The other problem being that as a web app, you have to have the address bar of Google Chrome, which I use on my phone. So you have that much slightly less space, which means for the most part you're going to have to be scrolling up and down. And when I'm playing a game and I want to feel immersed, I don't want to be scrolling. They're, on a native app, they're able to design it so it fits exactly into the confines of the phone. So what you see is what you get. I much prefer that, and it's actually for that reason that I stopped playing this game. Now, the only reason I give you this example is that in this case, they were able to make it a web app and not a native app, but for somebody like me, they would have done a little bit better to keep me as a customer if they at least had a native app option as well. My last example is a web app that doesn't work as a native app. Now, that's actually a lie because I have not found a web app that can't be a native app. Native apps have all of the functionality that you can have in the web app, so there's no real reason that it can't be done. But I will use this space to touch quickly on what some of the benefits are of going for a web app over a native app. So the first one, of course, you'll read the most is price. Web apps, because they function very similar to websites, are a lot easier to develop. They take a lot less time, which means the developers that you are either hiring or outsourcing to can get that put together a lot faster, which of course means less man hours, which means less cost. The second is accessibility. And while it isn't as big an issue as it was before, with a web app, you don't have to be at the mercy of like the Google Play Store and Apple iTunes Store to get your app approved so that it can be put on their platform. You can publish a website anytime without having to run it past really anyone. So you don't have to worry about that kind of barrier and maybe worrying about setting back your timelines for that. The other thing is that the people using your web app don't need to have access to the Google Play Store or the Apple Store in order to use this. So this means that some older phones will still be able to access it, like some tablets. Again, this isn't such a big issue anymore because most tablets and phones in the last however many years have had access to this, but it is an example I read on a lot of websites. So technically having a web app makes things a little bit more accessible, although again, having both, it just increases that much more. The third is monetization. With native apps, when they're in the Google or Apple stores, you have the option to set the price for people to buy right then and there, and I believe you also have the option to set up like recurring payments with them, but it kind of, in many cases, ends there. If you have a web app, you have a lot more options as far as easily including something like Google Ads to get some extra money through view revenue, stuff like that. There's just a lot more flexibility for different streams of revenue that way because you're not constricted by the system's rules. So of course there's a ton of subtle details that I didn't touch on in this conversation. For many clients, these details won't be that important. For those of you that it will be, definitely do some extra reading. I've included some links in the blog attached to this. But I'm going to give you what I would consider my final ruling in 3 points here. So the first point is if and when you have the resources to create both a web app and a native app, do both. Every example of a successful web app or native app that I've found, other than a couple of little outliers, they use both because then they can take example of the benefits of both. If you have the time and resources to do both, definitely go ahead and do that. If you are getting started without all of those resources though, these next points might be more relevant for you. 2, if you're just getting started and you don't have access to a ton of resources, go with a web app first. Now, the reason that I recommend this, and again I say recommend because this is not the end all, is that in order to have a web app, you also have to have a website. So you're kind of killing two birds with one stone. You can get quite a bit of marketing utility out of the two, and it's cheaper and faster generally to get this one going. So my recommendation again, get started with a web app if you have to choose one, and then work your way toward a native app at a later time. And number 3 is kind of an obvious one. If you don't have the choice but to make a web app, then make a web app. If you're creating a mobile game that's really feature intensive, makes use of the phone's hardware, you can't make that as a web app. Obviously, you're going to make that as a native app, and then you can use your mobile site later as technology advances, maybe to try and keep up with the app or to just use as a sales tool. So that is everything that I have for today for the case of web apps versus native apps. If you had any further questions or felt there was something that you feel is important that I should have covered in this, feel free to let me know by leaving a comment or reaching out to me directly. I have also left a list of resources from some of the places I mentioned that do have these kind of longer lists of technical pieces for you to definitely do some further reading on. Otherwise, that's all I have for today. Thanks for tuning in, and I will talk to you in the next one. Bye.